Marcus Thompson sat quietly against the cold brick wall of the downtown alley, his weathered face hidden beneath a worn baseball cap and his body wrapped in a tattered military surplus jacket that had seen better days. To any passerby, he appeared to be just another homeless man trying to find shelter from the evening chill. 3 teenagers approached him with predatory grins, their expensive designer clothes and cocky attitudes marking them as the type who believed the world owed them everything. Brad, Tyler, and Jake had no idea that the man they were about to humiliate and attack was a decorated Special Forces veteran with multiple combat tours and skills that could neutralize threats in seconds. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. What happened next would change all their lives forever. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Marcus Thompson began each day the same way he had for the past 18 months since arriving in the city. He woke before dawn in the small alcove behind the abandoned building where he had made his temporary shelter, folding his worn sleeping bag with the precision and attention to detail that had been drilled into him decades ago. His morning routine was methodical and disciplined. From the way he arranged his few possessions in a neat pile to the systematic manner in which he surveyed his surroundings for any changes or potential threats. Most people hurried past him on the sidewalk without making eye contact, their faces turned away in discomfort or disgust at his rumpled appearance and the faint smell of someone living rough. Business executives in expensive suits crossed the street to avoid him. Mothers pulled their children closer when they spotted his weathered face and unkempt beard, and teenagers, like the ones who would soon find him, made cruel jokes just loud enough for him to hear. But there was one place where Marcus found a small measure of dignity and human connection. Mel's Diner on 5th Street was a humble establishment where the coffee was strong and the portions generous. Sarah Martinez, a young waitress with kind eyes and a warm smile, always greeted him with genuine respect. She never asked questions about his circumstances or made him feel ashamed for counting out exact change in crumpled bills and quarters. Instead, she would bring him hot coffee and whatever day-old pastry was available, sometimes slipping him an extra helping when her manager wasn't looking. Marcus appreciated her kindness more than she could ever know, and he made sure to tip her whatever he could spare from his meager resources. During these quiet moments at the diner, Marcus would sit by the window and observe the bustling city with the trained eye of someone who had spent years analyzing terrain and assessing potential dangers in foreign lands. His posture remained straight despite his circumstances, and his eyes constantly scanned the street with a vigilance that most people would never notice or understand. Bradley Harrison III strutted down the pristine sidewalks of the upscale downtown district like he owned every square inch of concrete beneath his $200 sneakers. His perfectly styled blonde hair caught the light from the expensive storefronts, and his designer jacket bore the subtle logos that screamed wealth to anyone who knew how to look. At 17 years old, Brad had never wanted for anything in his life. Thanks to his father's successful law firm and his mother's real estate empire, money had always solved every problem and opened every door, giving him an unshakable belief that he was superior to anyone with less fortune than his family possessed. Tyler Mitchell followed close behind, his nervous energy barely contained as he tried to match Brad's confident swagger. Tyler wore equally expensive clothes, but they seemed to hang on his lanky frame with less natural ease, revealing his deep-seated insecurity beneath the designer facade. His family owned a chain of high-end restaurants, but Tyler constantly worried that he would never measure up to Brad's effortless charisma and social dominance. He compensated for his insecurities by eagerly participating in whatever cruel entertainment Brad devised, hoping that his loyalty would earn him the respect and acceptance he desperately craved. Jake Wilson brought up the rear of their small group, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his expensive jeans as he wrestled with the uncomfortable feeling that had been growing in his stomach all evening. Unlike his two companions, Jake sometimes questioned whether their behavior was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. His family's wealth came from his grandfather's successful construction business, but Jake had been raised with at least some understanding that not everyone enjoyed the same advantages he had been given. The 3 teenagers had spent their Friday evening wandering through the entertainment district, looking for ways to amuse themselves that usually involved asserting their perceived superiority over anyone they deemed beneath their social status. They had already mocked a street musician, made disparaging comments about the appearance of several restaurant workers, and deliberately left a mess at the coffee shop for the minimum wage employees to clean up. Their pattern was always the same. Find someone who couldn't fight back, humiliate them for their entertainment, then move on to the next victim without any consideration for the pain they left behind. Brad spotted Marcus first as they rounded the corner near the high-end shopping complex, his eyes immediately locking onto the figure huddled against the brick wall of the alley between two upscale boutiques. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face as he nudged Tyler with his elbow and pointed toward the weathered man in tattered clothing. "Look what we have here," Brad said with a tone of disgust that dripped with entitlement. "Some vagrant decided to set up camp right in the middle of our neighborhood. This is exactly what's wrong with this city." Tyler's eyes lit up with the same malicious excitement that always appeared when Brad identified a new target for their amusement. "Seriously disgusting." Tyler agreed, his voice taking on the sneering quality he used whenever he wanted to impress his wealthier friend. "People like that just bring down property values for everyone. My dad says vagrants are nothing but drug addicts and criminals who choose to live like animals instead of getting real jobs." Jake felt his stomach tighten as he looked at the man sitting quietly by himself, bothering no one, and simply trying to stay warm in the evening chill. Something about the way the man held himself, even in his obviously difficult circumstances, made Jake uncomfortable about what he could see forming in Brad's expression. "Maybe we should just leave him alone," Jake suggested quietly, but his words were immediately dismissed by his two companions. Brad's face twisted into an expression of righteous indignation, as if Jake had suggested they ignore a serious crime in progress. "Leave him alone? Are you kidding me?" "This is our part of the city, Jake. Our families pay taxes, so we don't have to deal with this kind of trash cluttering up the streets." He straightened his expensive jacket and ran his fingers through his perfectly styled hair, preparing himself for what he clearly saw as a civic duty. "I think it's time someone taught this bum a lesson about where he belongs. We're going to clean up the streets ourselves since the police obviously aren't doing their job." Tyler nodded eagerly, already pulling out his phone to record what he anticipated would be an entertaining confrontation to share on social media. "This is going to be epic," he said with a laugh that held no warmth or humanity. "Let's show this loser what happens when people like him invade spaces meant for people like us." Marcus rose slowly from his position against the brick wall, his movements deliberate and measured as he gathered the worn canvas bag that contained his few worldly possessions. Years of training in hostile environments had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every nerve in his body was sending him the same clear message that danger was approaching from behind. He could hear the whispered conversations and the shuffling footsteps of the three young men who had been watching him for the past several minutes, their voices carrying the particular tone of predators who had identified what they believed to be easy prey. Without turning around or giving any indication that he was aware of their presence, Marcus began walking toward the deeper shadows of the narrow alley that ran between the expensive boutiques and the old brick building that housed several upscale restaurants. His pace appeared casual and unhurried to any observer, but his route was carefully calculated to give him multiple escape options while also drawing the potential threat away from the busier street where innocent bystanders might be caught in whatever confrontation was about to unfold. The sound of their footsteps followed him into the alley, confirming his assessment that he had become their target for reasons he could easily imagine based on his appearance and circumstances. Marcus's trained ears picked up the subtle changes in their breathing patterns and the increasing confidence in their voices as they realized they had successfully isolated him in a location where they believed they held all the advantages. "Hey, you!" Brad's voice cut through the evening air with the commanding tone of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. "Old man, I'm talking to you." Marcus stopped walking and turned slowly to face the three teenagers who had now positioned themselves to block his exit from the alley. His weathered face remained calm and expressionless, showing none of the tactical calculations that were running through his mind as he automatically assessed each potential threat, identified their positions relative to cover and concealment, and noted the expensive clothing and soft hands that marked them as privileged youth who had likely never faced real danger in their pampered lives. "You need to move along, Grandpa," Tyler added with a laugh that echoed off the brick walls. "This isn't the place for people like you. Find yourself a nice bridge to sleep under somewhere else. Because we don't want your kind bringing down our neighborhood." Brad stepped forward with the swagger of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions, his face twisted into an expression of disgust and superiority. Without warning, he placed both hands on Marcus's chest and shoved him backward with enough force to make most men his age stumble and fall. "I said move along, you filthy bum," Brad snarled, his voice dripping with contempt and entitlement. "Nobody wants to look at your pathetic face while they're trying to enjoy a nice evening out. You're nothing but human garbage cluttering up our streets." Marcus absorbed the shove with barely a step backward, his body automatically shifting into a balanced stance that spoke of years of training in maintaining stability under pressure. His calm gray eyes met Brad's angry glare without flinching. And when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet dignity that seemed to come from some deep well of inner strength. "I'm not looking for any trouble, son," Marcus said evenly, his tone respectful but firm. "I was just trying to stay warm and mind my own business. There's no need for this to go any further." The measured way Marcus held himself, and the straight line of his shoulders despite his worn clothing, and the steady control in his voice should have been warning signs to anyone with experience reading dangerous men. But Brad and his companions saw only what they expected to see: a weak old man who was too scared to fight back against their superior youth and social position. Tyler laughed mockingly from his position near the alley entrance, emboldened by what he interpreted as fear in Marcus's calm response. "Look at him trying to sound all polite and dignified," Tyler jeered. "Like putting on a little act is going to make us forget that he's just another worthless vagrant who probably hasn't had a real job in his entire miserable life." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure even as the insults continued to rain down on him. His hands remained loose at his sides, but there was something in the way he positioned his feet and kept his weight balanced that suggested he was far more prepared for violence than his humble demeanor indicated. "Please," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone that might have given pause to men with more experience in genuine conflict. "Just let me walk away, and we can all go about our evening in peace." Tyler moved closer with the cruel enthusiasm of someone drunk on his own perceived power, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight as he spotted Marcus's worn canvas bag sitting on the ground where the older man had carefully placed it. "What do we have here?" Tyler said with mock curiosity, snatching up the bag before Marcus could react. "Let's see what kind of treasures a street rat like you carries around." With deliberate cruelty, Tyler upended the bag and shook out its contents, watching with satisfaction as Marcus's meager possessions scattered across the dirty alley floor. A few changes of threadbare clothing, a small first aid kit, a water-stained paperback book, and a carefully wrapped bundle that looked like it might contain something important, all tumbled onto the concrete in a heap that represented everything Marcus owned in the world. "Wow, what an impressive collection," Tyler sneered, grinding his expensive shoe into one of the shirts for good measure. "I bet this junk is worth almost $3 whole at the pawn shop." Jake hung back near the mouth of the alley, his discomfort growing stronger with each passing moment as he watched the scene unfold. Something about the way the homeless man stood perfectly still, watching Tyler destroy his belongings without any visible reaction, sent a chill down Jake's spine. Most people would be angry or afraid or pleading by now, but this man just observed everything with an almost professional detachment that Jake found deeply unsettling. There was something in the older man's eyes, a kind of calm alertness that reminded Jake of his uncle who had served in the military, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what was making him so nervous. Marcus watched his possessions being scattered and trampled with the same steady composure he had maintained throughout the confrontation. But behind his weathered features, his mind was working with the precision of a tactical computer. He noted Tyler's position relative to the bag, calculated the distance to each of the three young men, identified potential weapons within reach, and assessed the lighting conditions and available cover in the narrow alley. His years of combat experience had taught him to remain patient and gather intelligence before making any decisive moves, even when every instinct screamed at him to end this humiliation swiftly and decisively. The wrapped bundle that had fallen from his bag contained his military decorations and discharge papers. But he made no move to protect it, knowing that revealing its contents prematurely would only escalate a situation he still hoped to resolve without violence. Brad's hand moved to the inside pocket of his expensive jacket, and when it emerged, the gleaming blade of a folding knife caught the dim light from the street lamps at the mouth of the alley. The weapon transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation from simple bullying into something far more serious and dangerous. "Maybe you didn't hear us clearly the first time, old man," Brad said, his voice taking on a harder edge as he opened the knife with practiced ease. "We told you to get out of our neighborhood, and we meant it. Now you're going to learn what happens to people who don't listen when their betters are talking to them." Tyler immediately pulled out his phone and started recording, his face lit up with excitement at the prospect of capturing what he clearly expected to be a humiliating beatdown that would go viral on social media. "This is going to get so many views," Tyler said with a laugh, making sure to get good angles of both the knife and Marcus's face. "Everyone's going to love watching this bum get what he deserves for thinking he can just set up camp wherever he wants." Marcus's entire body shifted imperceptibly as his training automatically engaged in response to the presence of a deadly weapon. His eyes tracked the knife's position while simultaneously calculating the exact distance to each potential threat, identifying the closest cover, and mapping 3 different escape routes that would take him out of the confined space of the alley. The part of his mind that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments noted that Brad held the weapon like someone who had seen too many movies but had never actually used a blade in a real fight. Tyler was distracted by his phone and positioned poorly, while Jake remained near the alley entrance, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Despite every tactical advantage his training gave him, Marcus raised his hands slowly in a peaceful gesture, his voice remaining steady and calm even as the teenager waved a knife in his direction. "Son, you don't want to do this," Marcus said quietly, his tone carrying the weight of someone who had seen far too much violence in his lifetime. "Put the knife away and walk away now, before this situation gets out of hand and someone gets hurt. Trust me when I tell you that this isn't a road you want to go down." Marcus took a careful step backward toward the deeper end of the alley, his movements slow and deliberate as he tried to create distance between himself and the knife-wielding teenager. "I'm going to leave now," he said in the same calm, measured tone he had maintained throughout the confrontation. "There's no need for anyone to get hurt over something this trivial." But as Marcus moved toward what should have been his exit route, Tyler quickly repositioned himself to cut off the escape path, grinning with malicious satisfaction as he realized they had effectively trapped their victim in the narrow space between the brick walls. Jake reluctantly moved to help block the other potential exit, though his movements lacked the eager cruelty of his companions, and his face showed clear signs of internal conflict about what they were doing. "Where do you think you're going, Grandpa?" Brad taunted, taking another step forward with the knife held in front of him like a badge of authority. "We're not done with our conversation yet. You haven't learned your lesson about respecting your betters." The familiar weight of being trapped and surrounded by hostile forces triggered something deep in Marcus's memory, and for a brief moment he was no longer standing in a downtown alley but crouched in the mountains of Afghanistan, surrounded by enemy fighters who had underestimated the capabilities of the quiet American they had cornered. He remembered the citation that had accompanied his Bronze Star, earned during a mission where he had single-handedly held off an entire squad of Taliban fighters while protecting wounded civilians until extraction arrived. The Distinguished Service Cross had come later, after he had infiltrated an enemy compound to rescue captured fellow soldiers, moving through hostile territory with the ghost-like silence that had made him legendary among Special Forces units. 22 years of service, multiple combat deployments, advanced training in hand-to-hand combat, weapons expertise, and tactical operations that most people could never imagine. Marcus forced the memories back into the locked compartment of his mind, where he kept the war, focusing instead on the present situation and the 3 young men who had no idea what kind of predator they had cornered. His breathing remained steady and controlled, his posture calm but ready, as years of military discipline allowed him to maintain perfect composure, even while calculating exactly how quickly he could disarm and neutralize all three threats if the situation deteriorated beyond the point of peaceful resolution. Brad's patience finally snapped as his frustration with Marcus's calm demeanor boiled over into blind rage. "I'm sick of listening to you talk," Brad snarled, his face contorting with anger and entitlement. "Time to teach you some respect." Without any further warning, Brad lunged forward with the knife, aiming the blade toward Marcus's midsection in a clumsy attack that betrayed his complete lack of experience with actual violence. In that split second, everything changed. Marcus moved with a speed and precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics, his body flowing like water as years of specialized training took over his nervous system. His left hand shot up in a lightning-fast arc, deflecting Brad's knife arm away from his body while simultaneously stepping inside the teenager's reach. Before Brad could even register what was happening, Marcus's right hand had locked onto his wrist with an iron grip that felt like a mechanical vice, while his left hand struck a precise nerve cluster that instantly numbed Brad's entire arm. The knife clattered to the concrete with a metallic ring that echoed off the brick walls like a bell tolling the end of the teenager's confidence. Brad found himself spun around and pressed face first against the wall, with his arm twisted behind his back in a position that made any movement excruciatingly painful, all accomplished in less than 3 seconds by a man they had dismissed as a helpless vagrant. Tyler's phone trembled in his hands as he struggled to process what he had just witnessed, his brain refusing to accept that the slow, shabby, homeless man had just moved like a trained killer. "What the hell?" Tyler stammered, his voice cracking with shock and sudden fear. "How did he do that?" Jake pressed himself back against the opposite wall, his mouth hanging open as he stared at Marcus with a mixture of terror and dawning realization. The way the older man controlled Brad's struggling form with minimal effort, the professional precision of his movements, and the cold competence in his gray eyes suddenly painted a very different picture than the harmless vagrant they had thought they were tormenting. Marcus's voice, when he spoke, carried a new edge of authority that cut through the evening air like a blade. "I tried to warn you," he said quietly, maintaining his hold on Brad while his eyes swept over the other two teenagers with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential threats. "Now we're going to have a different kind of conversation." Tyler's shock lasted exactly 2 seconds before panic took over, and he dropped his phone to rush at Marcus, clearly hoping that superior numbers would somehow overcome the inexplicable skills the homeless man had just displayed. It was the worst decision Tyler would ever make in his 17 years of privileged existence. Marcus released Brad's arm and pivoted smoothly to meet Tyler's clumsy charge, his movements flowing with the deadly grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of close-quarters combat. Tyler's wild swing missed by inches as Marcus ducked beneath it and swept the teenager's legs with a precision that sent him crashing to the concrete in a controlled fall that looked effortless but was actually calculated to minimize serious injury. Before Tyler could even attempt to get back to his feet, Marcus had moved on to Jake, who was frantically trying to back away toward the mouth of the alley, while stammering apologies that came far too late to matter. Marcus closed the distance between them in 3 swift strides and placed one firm hand on Jake's chest, applying just enough pressure to pin him against the brick wall without causing damage. "Stay exactly where you are," Marcus commanded, and the voice that emerged was no longer the humble, respectful tone of a man asking for mercy. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, carrying the unmistakable authority of a leader who had commanded men in life-and-death situations. Jake's knees went weak as he found himself staring into gray eyes that held depths of experience and capability that his sheltered mind could barely comprehend. Brad struggled to push himself away from the wall, nursing his numbed arm and trying to understand how their easy victim had transformed into something that belonged in an action movie. "Who the hell are you?" Brad gasped, his voice barely above a whisper as the reality of their situation began to sink in. Marcus surveyed all 3 teenagers with the calm assessment of a professional evaluating a completed mission, his posture straight and commanding in a way that made his tattered clothing seem like a disguise rather than a symbol of his circumstances. "Someone you should have left alone," Marcus replied, his tone carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom and experiences these boys could never imagine. "Someone who tried very hard to walk away before you forced my hand." The sound of sirens grew louder as two police cruisers rounded the corner and pulled up to the mouth of the alley, their red and blue lights painting the brick walls in alternating colors that transformed the narrow space into something resembling a crime scene. Several witnesses from the busy street had called 911 after hearing the commotion and seeing three teenagers corner what appeared to be a vulnerable homeless man, though none of them could have anticipated the dramatic reversal they had just witnessed. Officer Maria Rodriguez stepped out of the lead vehicle and began walking toward the group with her hand resting casually on her radio, prepared to deal with what dispatch had described as a potential assault in progress. Her practiced eyes quickly took in the scene: three well-dressed teenagers looking shaken and disheveled, one homeless man standing calmly in the center of the alley, and a knife lying discarded on the concrete. But as Rodriguez got closer and the streetlight illuminated the homeless man's weathered face, her professional composure cracked and her eyes widened in recognition and disbelief. "Marcus?" she whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the man she had served alongside in some of the most dangerous places on earth. "Marcus Thompson? Is that really you?" Marcus turned toward the familiar voice, and for the first time since the confrontation began, his stern expression softened into something resembling a genuine smile. "Hello, Maria," he said quietly, his tone carrying the warmth of old friendship and shared experiences that transcended their current circumstances. "It's been a long time." Officer Rodriguez holstered her radio and approached Marcus with obvious emotion in her eyes, completely ignoring the three teenagers who were watching this unexpected reunion with growing confusion and dread. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced to her partner and the gathering crowd, her voice filled with a mixture of respect and amazement, "you are looking at Master Sergeant Marcus Thompson, United States Army Special Forces. This man is a recipient of the Bronze Star for valor in combat, the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy fire." The words hit Brad, Tyler, and Jake like physical blows, each military decoration and honor serving to illuminate just how catastrophically they had misjudged the man they had chosen to torment and attack. Brad felt the blood drain from his face as the full weight of Officer Rodriguez's words crashed down on him like a collapsing building. His legs suddenly felt weak and unsteady as he stared at Marcus with new eyes, seeing not the helpless vagrant he had tormented, but a decorated war hero whose service record read like something from a military thriller. Tyler had gone completely silent, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as his brain struggled to process the magnitude of their mistake, while Jake pressed himself harder against the brick wall as if he could somehow disappear into the mortar between the stones. Officer Rodriguez continued speaking, her voice growing stronger and more reverent with each detail she shared about Marcus's distinguished career. 22 years of active duty service with the United States Army Special Forces, she announced to the gathering crowd of onlookers who had emerged from nearby restaurants and shops to witness the unfolding drama. Master Sergeant Thompson completed 6 combat deployments across Afghanistan and Iraq, leading special operations teams in some of the most dangerous missions our military has ever undertaken. Marcus stood quietly as his former comrade recounted accomplishments he had never spoken about to anyone in civilian life, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and discomfort at having his private struggles thrust into the spotlight. Rodriguez pulled out her phone and quickly accessed a military database, reading from Marcus's official service record with the reverence normally reserved for reading scripture. Leader of Operation Silent Thunder, where his team rescued 47 captured civilians from a Taliban stronghold. Recipient of 2 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in combat, the Distinguished Service Cross for single-handedly holding off enemy forces while evacuating wounded soldiers, and the Army Commendation Medal for valor above and beyond the call of duty. The teenagers felt their entitled worldview crumbling around them like a house of cards in a hurricane. Brad realized that the man he had shoved and threatened with a knife had probably faced down armed terrorists in mountain caves and desert compounds, saving lives while they had spent their comfortable years playing video games and posting on social media. Tyler's expensive phone lay forgotten on the concrete, Its screen cracked from when he had dropped it in shock, just like his confidence and sense of superiority. Jake could only stare in horror at Marcus, understanding for the first time in his privileged life what true heroism and sacrifice actually looked like, and knowing that he had participated in attacking someone who represented everything noble and honorable that he himself would never be. Officer Rodriguez's partner, Sergeant Williams, stepped forward with handcuffs ready as the full picture of what had transpired became crystal clear. Bradley Harrison, Tyler Mitchell, and Jake Wilson. He announced in an official tone that cut through the evening air like a judge's gavel. You are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, attempted robbery, and harassment of a military veteran. The metallic click of handcuffs closing around their wrists marked the beginning of the end for the three teenagers' privileged existence. Brad tried to protest as the cold steel bit into his skin, his voice cracking with panic and disbelief. This is insane! My father is going to sue everyone involved in this. Do you have any idea who my family is? But his threats and bluster fell on deaf ears as Officer Rodriguez read them their rights with professional precision, each word sealing their fate more completely than the last. While the teenagers were being processed and loaded into the police cruisers, Tyler's abandoned phone buzzed with notification after notification as the video he had started recording began spreading across social media platforms with viral intensity. But instead of the humiliating beatdown of a homeless man that Tyler had expected would make him internet famous, the footage told a very different story that painted him and his friends as the villains in a narrative that was capturing the attention and outrage of viewers across the country. The video showed three privileged teenagers cornering and attacking a decorated war hero, and the public response was swift and merciless. Within hours, their names, faces, and family information had been identified and shared by thousands of angry social media users who demanded justice for the veteran they had victimized. The first phone calls came to their parents before the teenagers had even reached the police station. Bradley Harrison Sr.'s law firm began receiving hundreds of angry calls from potential clients who declared they would never hire an attorney whose son attacked military heroes. Tyler's family restaurant chain faced immediate boycotts as customers posted scathing reviews and photographs of Tyler's mugshot on every review platform they could find. Even Jake's family construction business found itself facing canceled contracts as word spread about their son's participation in the assault. The comfortable bubble of wealth and privilege that had protected these families for generations was bursting with explosive force, leaving them exposed to the harsh judgment of a public that had no tolerance for spoiled children who attacked those who had sacrificed everything in service to their country. The legal consequences fell upon the three teenagers, with the crushing weight of justice finally being served. Though each young man faced different degrees of punishment based on their level of participation in the assault, Bradley Harrison faced the most serious charges as the ringleader who had produced and wielded the knife, with the district attorney pursuing felony assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threatening, and hate crimes enhancement due to his targeting of a vulnerable individual based on perceived social status. The prosecutor made it clear that Brad's wealthy family connections would not shield him from facing the full consequences of his actions, and his father's expensive legal team found themselves fighting an uphill battle against overwhelming evidence and public outrage. Tyler Mitchell discovered that his acceptance and full scholarship to the prestigious university he had planned to attend in the fall had been immediately revoked after the admissions committee viewed the viral video of his participation in the attack. The university released a public statement declaring that they could not in good conscience provide educational opportunities to someone who had demonstrated such callous disregard for a military veteran's dignity and safety. His parents, who had built their restaurant empire on the foundation of serving their community with respect and hospitality, issued a tearful public apology and announced that Tyler would be indefinitely suspended from any involvement in the family business until he could prove he had learned from his terrible mistakes. Jake Wilson, whose hesitation and obvious discomfort during the incident had been captured on video, received the most lenient treatment from both the legal system and public opinion. His charges were reduced to misdemeanor harassment and public disturbance, with a possibility of having them expunged from his record if he completed extensive community service. Working with homeless veterans, his grandfather, the founder of the family construction company, called Jake into his office for a conversation that left the young man in tears as he faced the disappointment of a man who had built his business on principles of hard work, respect, and treating every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. The shame and public humiliation that engulfed all three families served as a harsh reminder that privilege and wealth meant nothing when measured against basic human decency and respect for those who had sacrificed everything in service to their country. The local news stations picked up the story within hours of the arrest, and by the next morning, Marcus Thompson's face was being broadcast across every major network in the region as reporters delved deeper into the circumstances that had led a decorated war hero to the streets of the downtown district. Channel 7's veteran correspondent, Sarah Chen, conducted the first in-depth investigation into Marcus's background, uncovering a heartbreaking story that represented the struggles of thousands of veterans across the country who had fallen through the cracks of an inadequate support system. The investigation revealed that Marcus had returned from his final deployment 3 years earlier, suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury sustained during an improvised explosive device attack that had killed 2 members of his unit. Despite his distinguished service record and multiple commendations for heroism, Marcus had found himself trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare of delayed disability claims, insufficient mental health resources, and a Veterans Affairs system that was overwhelmed and underfunded. His struggles with PTSD had cost him his marriage when his wife could no longer cope with his nightmares, panic attacks, and emotional withdrawal, and his inability to hold steady employment due to his symptoms had eventually led to the loss of his home and savings. The news coverage sparked immediate outrage from viewers who could not understand how a man who had risked his life repeatedly for his country could end up homeless and forgotten on city streets. Phone calls flooded the offices of local politicians demanding answers and action, while social media exploded with posts expressing shame that society had failed such a deserving hero. Local veterans organizations stepped forward to share similar stories of members who had struggled with homelessness, addiction, and suicide after returning from combat, painting a picture of a veteran crisis that most civilians had never fully understood or acknowledged. Donations began pouring in from across the community as people sought to make amends for the collective failure that had allowed Marcus to suffer in silence and anonymity. Restaurant owner Maria Santos announced that her establishment would provide free meals to any homeless veteran, while several local businesses offered employment opportunities specifically designed to accommodate veterans dealing with PTSD and readjustment challenges. Officer Rodriguez made the first call to the local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter within 24 hours of the incident. Her voice filled with determination as she explained the situation to Commander Patricia Hayes, a Vietnam veteran who had spent decades advocating for homeless and struggling veterans in their community. "We have a decorated Special Forces veteran who's been living on our streets for over a year, and none of us even knew who he was," Rodriguez said, her tone heavy with the weight of collective failure. "This man saved lives overseas, and we let him become invisible right here at home." Commander Hayes immediately mobilized every resource at her disposal, reaching out to the American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, and the local chapter of Team Red, White, and Blue to coordinate a comprehensive support network for Marcus. Within days, they had assembled a coalition of veterans advocates, mental health professionals specializing in PTSD treatment, housing specialists, and employment counselors who understood the unique challenges faced by combat veterans transitioning to civilian life. The city council, galvanized by the public outcry and their own embarrassment at having a decorated war hero living on their streets, announced the creation of the Marcus Thompson Veterans Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to identify and assist homeless veterans throughout the region. Mayor Jennifer Walsh held a press conference where she committed city resources to fund emergency housing, mental health services, and job training programs specifically tailored to veterans dealing with combat-related trauma and readjustment difficulties. When Rodriguez and Commander Hayes approached Marcus with their offer of assistance, they found him sitting quietly in the same spot where the confrontation had occurred, his expression guarded and wary of the attention his story had generated. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," Marcus said slowly, his voice carrying the caution of someone who had learned not to trust promises too quickly. "But I've been disappointed by the system before, and I'm not sure I'm ready to go through that again." Rodriguez knelt down beside her former comrade, her eyes reflecting understanding and respect for his reluctance. "Marcus, asking for help isn't giving up," she said gently. "It's the same kind of courage you showed when you carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight to save ourselves." After a long moment of silence, Marcus slowly nodded his acceptance, recognizing that true strength sometimes meant allowing others to help carry the burden that had become too heavy for one person to bear alone. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Bradley Harrison stood in the common room of the Riverside Veterans Transitional Housing Center, his expensive designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a volunteer t-shirt, as he listened intently to the stories shared by men and women who had sacrificed years of their lives in service to their country. The court-mandated community service that had initially felt like punishment had gradually transformed into something much deeper and more meaningful as Brad encountered veteran after veteran whose struggles with homelessness, addiction, and mental health challenges opened his eyes to realities he had never imagined in his sheltered existence. The turning point had come when he met Sarah Williams, a female Army medic who had lost both legs to an improvised explosive device while treating wounded soldiers in Iraq, and who now used a wheelchair to navigate a world that seemed designed to exclude people like her. Her dignity, strength, and unwavering commitment to helping other veterans, despite her own challenges, had shattered Brad's remaining illusions about what real courage and character looked like. Using his family's connections and his father's legal expertise, Brad had established the Second Chance Veterans Foundation, dedicated to providing emergency housing assistance and legal advocacy for homeless veterans, navigating the complex bureaucracy of disability claims and benefits applications. Tyler Mitchell had channeled his experience into becoming a passionate advocate against bullying and social cruelty, speaking at schools throughout the region about the devastating consequences that could result from treating others as less than human based on their appearance or circumstances. His presentations included the viral video of his own shameful behavior, using his public humiliation as a teaching tool to help other young people understand how quickly cruel entertainment could escalate into serious criminal activity. The former social media influencer had redirected his online presence toward promoting kindness and empathy, sharing stories of veterans and homeless individuals who deserved respect and support rather than scorn and abuse. Jake Wilson had found his calling working with at-risk teenagers at the downtown community center, using his own experience as an example of how peer pressure and moral cowardice could lead good people to make terrible decisions. His mentoring sessions focused on helping young people develop the courage to stand up for what was right, even when their friends were choosing a darker path, and his genuine remorse and commitment to change had made him an effective voice for positive choices and second chances. Marcus Thompson stood at the podium in the auditorium of Lincoln High School, his appearance transformed from the weathered homeless man the students might have passed on the street without a second glance into someone who commanded immediate respect and attention. The small apartment provided by the Veterans Initiative had given him a place to shower regularly, sleep in a real bed, and store the few possessions he had managed to keep through his years on the streets. More importantly, the comprehensive mental health treatment he was receiving had begun to heal wounds that went far deeper than anything visible on his body. His new role as a peer counselor at the Veterans Support Center had given him purpose and direction that he had lost after leaving the military, allowing him to use his experiences to help other veterans navigate the difficult transition from combat zones to civilian life. "Service and sacrifice are words that get thrown around a lot," Marcus began, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once commanded special forces teams in hostile territory. But the real sacrifice isn't just what happens overseas. For many veterans, the hardest battles are fought right here at home, against invisible enemies like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and a society that often doesn't understand what we've been through or how to help us heal. In the back of the auditorium, 3 young men sat listening with rapt attention as the man they had once attacked shared his story with vulnerability and courage that left the entire room in complete silence. Brad, Tyler, and Jake had requested permission to attend Marcus's presentation, wanting to hear firsthand the full story of the man whose life they had tried to destroy on that terrible night 6 months earlier. Marcus spoke about the invisible wounds that many veterans carried, the difficulty of readjusting to a world that seemed trivial and meaningless after experiencing the life-and-death intensity of combat, and the shame that prevented many proud soldiers from asking for the help they desperately needed. He talked about how easy it was for society to overlook and dismiss those who didn't fit comfortable stereotypes, and how quickly someone could fall from hero to invisible pariah based solely on circumstances beyond their control. When Marcus finished his presentation and opened the floor for questions, Brad slowly raised his hand, his voice shaking with emotion as he stood to address the man he had once threatened with a knife. "Master Sergeant Thompson," Brad said, his formal use of Marcus's military rank carrying deep respect and recognition, "I want to publicly apologize for my inexcusable behavior and thank you for showing me what real strength and forgiveness look like." The transformation that had taken place in the lives of Marcus Thompson and the 3 young men who had attacked him became a symbol of hope and redemption that rippled throughout the entire community in ways that none of them could have anticipated on that fateful night in the alley. Marcus had found not only housing and medical care for his physical and emotional wounds, but also a renewed sense of purpose as he helped other veterans navigate the difficult journey from military service to civilian life. His work at the Veterans Support Center had grown into a comprehensive program that connected homeless veterans with resources, housing, and employment opportunities, while also providing the peer support that only someone who had walked the same difficult path could truly offer. The 3 teenagers had each channeled their shame and remorse into positive action that honored the lesson Marcus had taught them about the true meaning of service and sacrifice. Brad's foundation had already housed 12 homeless veterans and was expanding its legal advocacy program to help veterans navigate the complex disability claims process. Tyler's anti-bullying presentations had reached thousands of students across the region, using his own story as a powerful example of how quickly cruelty could escalate into life-changing consequences. Jake's mentoring work had helped dozens of at-risk youth find the courage to make better choices when faced with peer pressure and moral challenges. The Marcus Thompson Veterans Initiative had become a model program that other cities were studying and implementing, proving that communities could make a real difference in the lives of those who had sacrificed everything in service to their country. But the most important change had been in the way the community learned to see the people they encountered every day with new eyes, recognizing that appearances could be deceiving and that everyone had a story worth knowing and respecting. So the next time you pass someone on the street who looks different, who seems down on their luck, or who doesn't fit your expectations of what success and dignity should look like, remember Marcus Thompson's story. Remember that heroes don't always wear uniforms or live in comfortable homes, and that the person you're tempted to ignore or dismiss might be someone who has sacrificed more for your freedom and safety than you could ever imagine. Take a moment to treat them with the respect and kindness that every human being deserves, because you never know when you might be encountering someone whose courage and service have shaped the very world you live in today.